I don't know how I came to know about Twin Peaks. I've always been aware of it. It has always been something that I put into a mental box of, I know I will like this, and so I will save this for a future time. It's one of those pieces of media that just exists in your awareness of pop culture just due to the sheer size of its reputation. It is weird, quirky, enigmatic with its plot, and co-created by a director known for his unconventional style of filmmaking, even birthing an adjective based upon his own name that's used to allude to aspects of other media that give off the type of vibe his works do. Something being described as Lynchian indicates that it has surreal imagery, a loose plot, or weird characters, or dreamlike atmosphere, or gross skin-textured talking things, all of which I deeply love. However, Twin Peaks' special position in the media space was something I always found to be most fascinating. I've heard it referenced in video games, movies, other TV shows, and to an extent, even anime. One of my favorite trope or setting is the small town, big time mystery with friends, the likes of Steins Gate, Donnie Darko, and Serial Experiments Lane, all of which have to do with rather insignificant teenagers somehow stumbling upon secrets that reveal a deep, dark, metaphysical rabbit hole that they fall down. These usually end up becoming stories very dear to my being, as they remind me of when I was younger. Me and my friends would go around our apartment complex and pretend to be ghost detectives and look into every little piece of stimuli that caught our attention in a super serious way. And so, Twin Peaks was set up just perfectly for me to absolutely love when I finally watched it. It was, as I thought, going to fill me up with more of that warm nostalgia and finally bring some comfort during my summer vacations when I was practically isolated from everyone I knew. And so, I watched it. And afterwards, I played the 2015 Twin Peaks-inspired Lynchian horror game, Life is Strange. And so here I am, talking about why nostalgia will kill us all. A wistful or excessively sentimental yearning for return to or of some past period or irrecoverable condition is the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition of nostalgia. For the sake of this video, I'm going to generalize the word a pinch, as the nostalgia I'm interested in is a wider philosophical phenomenon than it is a personal, emotional experience. So, nostalgia is, with all the fancy words trimmed off, a yearning for return to or of a past period or irrecoverable condition. This is exactly what Don't Nod's Life is Strange, the entirety of the game, from its mechanics, story, and even its wider aesthetics, are all submerged in. If you didn't know, Life is Strange is a game following the story of young adult Max Caulfield, who discovers that she has the powers of controlling time to a limited extent. The primary game mechanic is holding down the left trigger, which leads Max to raise her hand, and time around her rewinds by a minute or two. Later on in the game, Max also gains the ability to travel back further in time using a photograph of that particular moment. Now, I don't think it's hard to see where I'm going with this in nostalgia. Rewinding time and traveling far back in time are exactly what nostalgia makes us desire. It is a longing to go back, and Max has the ability to do so. Now, merely going back in time does not suggest nostalgia. The reason I say this game is based upon nostalgia is because of the motivation behind Max's several travels back in time. And there is only one. Max finds herself in her college bathroom trying to photograph a peculiar blue butterfly that flew in. You know, blue butterfly. Like in the butterfly effect. Like in The butterfly effect that's about time. Suddenly, two individuals, one Nathan Prescott, spoiled rich kid, bully, douchebag, and a blue-haired girl come in. One thing leads to another, and the bully pulls a gun and kills the girl in a scuffle. Surprise, surprise, the blue-haired girl turns out to be Chloe Price, Max's childhood best friend whom she abandoned 7 years ago as she and her family left for Seattle. Most of Max's time adventures hinge on her relationship with Chloe. The next 3 episodes, the game is split into 5 parts that it calls episodes. I wonder why. Has Max used her powers to help Chloe investigate the mysterious disappearance of Chloe's other best friend, Rachel Amber. You could argue Max does this because she is, as the game suggests, an everyday hero who just likes to help people. But I really don't think so, because as it would become very clear at the ending choice, that is to choose between saving Chloe and the entire town and the people of Arcadia Bay, love for Chloe is what moves Max. This is interesting, because what is this love founded upon? Does Max love Chloe because she's a really nice and kind-hearted person to be around? Well, not really, no. She is often self-centered and rude to Max, even getting mad at her if she chooses to answer a suicidal girl's phone call while they're hanging out. The Chloe we encounter in the present time of the game is a confused, lost, and an angsty college dropout who hasn't gotten over the death of her father and indulges in self-pity and self-destructive activities. She's not nice to anyone and does not really care about anyone except if they get her what she wants. Of course, I would be too harsh on her if I said she didn't care about Max. I do think she does, only that even her own affection for Max isn't built upon their meeting during the game when the game takes place. Their relationship is indeed solely based back in the Arcadia Bay of 7 years ago, a time and a place where both of them were children, William, Chloe's dad, was alive, nobody was missing, and their plans of becoming pirates and taking over Arcadia Bay was intact. This distant past, this irrecoverable space and time, is exactly where their relationship's roots are founded on. This becomes overbearingly clear in episode 4, titled Dark Room. Max goes back in time to their childhood via a photograph that William took before his car accident, hides his keys, subsequently saving him, and returns back to the present to find that although William survived, Chloe had gotten into a car accident instead, leaving her completely immobile and her family in financial shambles. As Max explores this version of the Price's home, she reminisces nostalgically even harder, as this Chloe is much closer to the Chloe she once knew. She's much nicer and no longer dyes her hair blue. The reason she even goes back and saves William is basically to get back this Chloe from her childhood. So yes, their dynamic is one entirely based upon their past as opposed to one that develops as new experiences are made. The Max we find in the beginning of the game is already one who is ridden with nostalgia. She chooses to go back to Blackwell Academy to study photography in the town where she grew up and spent most of her childhood years in. As we find out later through Max's thoughts, although she had made friends in Seattle, where she and her family moved to 7 years ago, her heart really never left Arcadia Bay. It had always remained by the seaside with Chloe. So, of course, Max chooses to return to her childhood home, back to her childhood best friend, Chloe. Now, Life is Strange is a video game that has quite a mixed reputation on the web. A lot of people love and relate to the main two leads and their bordering on romance relationship. They find the characters endearing and fun, and hold the game as a highly emotional experience. And on the other hand, people absolutely despise the game for its characters and dialogue that border on cringe. Cringe because yes, Max is an I'm not like the other girls, hipster millennial. Her language, her style, her vibe, and how her dorm room is decorated all give this away. She uses a lot of early 2010s hipster millennial lingo, dresses plainly, likes nerdy stuff like photography, and her dorm room has an acoustic guitar, a poster of an in-game version of Catcher in the Rye, and of course Max's last name, Caulfield, being a direct reference to Holden Caulfield, the novel's angsty protagonist, and pop culture references litter her dialogue. Chloe, too, is a punk rock girl with blue hair who talks like this.
Perimeter, as my step-ass would say. Now, let's talk business.
I got nothing for you.
Wrong. You got hella cash.
Even looking at Life is Strange, the game, the fact of the 2010s hipster aesthetic is evident. The soundtrack is largely made up of acoustic guitars and raw vocals singing along to a catchy and often moody melody. The character models and animation work doesn't look like something from 2015. Of course, Life is Strange didn't have a big budget, but still, I think that the jank or the Unreal Engine-ness adds to this kind of hipster nostalgia. All of this, alongside how the narrative is structured around Chloe and Max's already discussed, almost toxic if not dysfunctional relationship, has led a lot of people disliking the game. However, I believe that once you take a step back and take the game's indulgence in its 2010s pastiche as a part of what it wants to explore with its themes of nostalgia and going back to a place and a time where you normally shouldn't be able to, things begin to make sense. David Lynch is somebody deeply interested in the emotional unconscious of the modern subject. If you looked into anything about the man, you know precisely two things. One, that he will literally kill himself if he forgets an idea he had.
If you don't write it down, it could happen that the next day then you want to blow your brains out.
Oh, it's that bad.
And two, he is really into something called transcendental meditation, a form of deep meditation that's achieved by repeating a certain word or phrase over and over again until it loses all meaning and crumbles into nonsensical utterances. By doing so, one is apparently able to transcend the realm of language. And if you watched my previous video where I brought up post-structural theory and how language creates the world we know, this transcendence would suggest to be indeed a transcendence of subjecthood as such, a transcendence of the appearance, the surface, to something much deeper and barer. From the very beginning of his filmmaking journey, Lynch has been interested in this very same transcendence of mere appearance. Lynch started off as a painter and entered filmmaking out of his desire to make pictures move. In other words, to transgress the limitations of paintings, that being their static nature. In an interview published in the adult comic book magazine Heavy Metal that followed the release of his first feature film, 1977's Eraserhead, Lynch had this to say about his childhood. Quote, "My childhood was picket fences, blue skies, red flowers, and cherry trees. But then I would see millions of little ants swarming on the cherry tree, which had pitch oozing out of it. This, again, points back to his interest in peeling back the beautiful layers of contemporary social life and revealing the millions of little ants swarming inside its rotten core. I would argue that most of Lynch's works are preoccupied with this very task. Blue Velvet and Mulholland Drive open on an almost idealized depiction of middle-class Americana and Hollywood, only to spiral into the psychosexual darkness that lies beneath. Of course, Twin Peaks is no exception. The quiet town of Twin Peaks appears at a quick glance to be an ideal of 90s suburban America. Affable fishermen enjoy fishing every morning. Small businesses thrive in the local community. Pretty high school girls break into a slow dance in the middle of the day. And the local sheriff doesn't have to do much except to sip on coffee and munch on donuts. And of course, racial homogeneity. There are no black people in Twin Peaks. But of course, this is only if you squint your eyes indefinitely, since as the show peels the layers back following FBI Special Agent Dale Cooper's investigation into the murder of teenager Laura Palmer, the appearance of this ideal suburbia only works to hide the circle of violence, drugs, and deception, and the metaphysical representation of evil itself. Still no black people, though. Appearances are perhaps the most powerful force in Twin Peaks. When you think of the town, you don't really think of its dark forests where trade of illegal substances between high schoolers and shady men are carried out, or its underground gambling and prostitution ring, One-Eyed Jacques. Instead, you think of the Double R Diner. You think of the sheriff's station, cups of black coffee and donuts. You think of Andy, the clumsy but adorable cop, being innocently oblivious to Lucy's flirtations. You think of the cozy Great Northern Hotel with its overwhelmingly warm wooden interior and the serene waterfall beside it. You think of high schoolers singing and dancing at the Roadhouse. You think of the lone road surrounded by fresh-smelling Douglas firs. And you think of all these things not with perfect cinematic clarity, no, but through a lens that's tinted with warmth and highlighted with halation. Characters like Pete, the Log Lady, Major Garland, Everyman Big Ed, and his superhuman wife Nadine make the place ever more inviting and interesting. Of course, this is why much of the show is accurately described as a journey into the town's seedy underbelly, in that they are almost separate worlds, that this good part is another planet to the nightmarish bad part. But despite this journey, despite the depths of darkness we find in Twin Peaks, this vision of the warm golden 90s stays intact. A part of the reason, at least a part that was intentionally done so, is that Lynch and Frost wanted to create a television show that also commented on the soap operas and sitcoms that were airing on television at that time. You can see obvious traces of this intent in some of the campy and melodramatic places the narrative often ends up in. However, the peculiar aftermath, intended or not, is the fact that they ended up creating something imbued with the already existing past, that is the style and legacy of those aforementioned sitcoms. In other words, Twin Peaks was, from the very beginning, due to its referential nature, nostalgic. Of course, this isn't a criticism. Twin Peaks' later twists and turns ended up being all the more shocking because it started off basing itself upon those 80s soap operas. Holy fucking shit, soap operas. Why do they call them soap operas? They were morally driven, often reinforcing existing values about the traditional family unit, the police, the state, business, and so on. Twin Peaks subverts them, but its subversion utilizes nostalgia first and foremost. We believe Sarah's grief and Leland's mental breakdown after their daughter's death. They lost their young and only daughter. The home is irreparably broken down, and alongside it, both Leland and Sarah too. Except, of course, that's not quite true. Laura's death did not lead to the breaking down of the family structure. Instead, the family structure, which gives the patriarch immense amount of power while subordinating both the mother and the child, especially the female child, is what exactly killed Laura Palmer. It was Leland, the father, within whom Bob, an agent of the Black Lodge, the embodiment of evil and death, dwelled. In Fire Walk With Me, we see that Laura finds this out. She finds out that her father was the one who would climb into her bed and do terrible things to her. She finds out that she can't do anything about it. In one of the scenes, we realize that even Sarah knows that something is wrong with Leland. She even tries to intervene, but nothing really comes of it. Our trust in the family is, rooted in socialization. But I think that this trust manifests itself, at least in a personal, emotional level, as nostalgia. Nostalgia is a longing, but presupposed in that longing is a trust for what is longed for. A trust not only that it can be recaptured, but also that whatever it is should be recaptured. Maddie, Laura's cousin, is also killed by Leland. Her whole stay in Twin Peaks is deeply rooted in nostalgia. There are instances where she reminisces about spending time with Laura in Twin Peaks. Her trust of Leland stems from this nostalgia. It gets her killed. At the same time, upon seeing Maddie, James and Donna employ her likeness to Laura to investigate further into the matter. Of course, nothing productive or good ever really comes out of this. James even falls in love with Maddie due to her likeness, staining his relationship with Donna. Similarly, Bob's relation with Leland too is one that is tied to nostalgia. I don't know if what he says about the man in the drawing is true or not, but that doesn't matter. When is nostalgia ever true? Of course, I have been avoiding the story of one character in particular, and that is for good reason, as I believe he is the strongest avenue through which this treachery of nostalgia is explored. I'm of course talking about the charming, sensitive, and a little weird Dalai Lama stan, Special Agent Dale Cooper. Idiosyncratic is the word to describe Dale Cooper. He's almost randomly sympathetic to the Tibetan independence. For an FBI agent, he takes up unconventional methods in solving the murder case of a high schooler and really loves his coffee.
This is, excuse me, a damn fine cup of coffee.
But on the other hand, he is a square man. He is nice, rational, fun to be around, athletic, and knows when to play the authority card. He is practically a Mary Sue, ignoring the latter section of the second season, which has almost universally gotten flack for a drop in quality. He is quirky and charming, and therefore he wins most of the other characters over, and going by my own experience and general fan perception, the audience as well. Cooper's goodness remains intact even as we delve deeper into the darker depths of Twin Peaks, and thus the aforementioned image of the town of Twin Peaks we form in our heads is one which cannot exist without Cooper. Room 315 in the Great Northern is his room, not just any other room in a hotel, it's Cooper's room. This is why a lot of fans, including myself, were anxious to see him back in The Return, and were even frustrated with the whole Dougie and Evil Cooper storylines. Indeed, David Lynch had massacred our boy. But this massacre is what a return truly entails. In Das Unheimlich, Freud argues that the uncanny is characterized by two distinct types of returns. Phylogenetic, the return of older beliefs a modern enlightened mind has overcome, such as the belief in the return of the dead, for example, and ontogenetic, the return of repressed infantile complexes such as the omnipotence of thoughts. Either way, the Freudian conception of the uncanny is associated with a return, a recurrence of something that is lost or overcome. This helps to explain why a lot of nostalgia seems to also be associated with the uncanny. We've discussed the liminal spaces phenomenon earlier on this channel, where people on the internet began to experience weird and eerie feelings when met with peculiar photographs of desolate public spaces. One of the traits that these photographs possessed was that they were frequently associated with childhood or general cultural past, such as playgrounds, public pools, cafeterias, and so on. People, alongside this anxious feeling of the uncanny, also felt a weird nostalgia. Of course, the very definition of liminality indicates that these spaces are everyday places that we pass through, hence forming an unconscious connection with them that we normally don't overtly recognize. In any case, with Freud's definition of the uncanny, nostalgia fits in quite perfectly. If the uncanny is the return of something that's lost, then nostalgia is the desire for this return, specifically a return of the pleasant, safe, and comfortable. Now, Freud himself, the freaky little boy man he is, postulated that all nostalgia is, at its core, a desire to return to the original pleasant and secure time and space, the original home that we lost upon discovering our self. By which, of course, he meant the mother's wombs. We all want to re-enter our mother's wombs. However, the algos part of nostalgia, in other words, the suffering, enters this postulation when we realize the traumatic reality of the mother's genitals being the entrance to the womb. Now, for most people, like most of Freudian theory, this may seem preposterous and even weird if you take this at a face value. That's why psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan is said to interpret Freud like how Freud interpreted dreams. As such, Lacan interprets the mother's body as a time and a space that is essentially atemporal, that is disconnected with these dimensions of reality, and as such, a complete fantasy. The womb comes to represent an absolute plenitude. Quote, "The paradox of the Freudian Lacanian subject, therefore, lies in the fact that its very being is constituted by nostalgia, an unappeased yearning to return to an imagined state of perfection that never existed. Plenitude is always imaginary. All nostalgia plays on this dynamic of subjectivity and partakes of its fundamental illusion." Unquote. The uncanny, then, is experienced when this lost part is returned. Instead of completing or perfecting existence, the lost part returns to destroy it. In other words, a return of that which is longed for in nostalgia ends up not comforting one or providing one with security and safety, but a traumatic disaster that alters one's perception of what was longed for and leaves one hurt and sorely affected. In his 2009 book, Capitalist Realism, Is There No Alternative?, philosopher Mark Fisher provides an examination into the dominant cultural imagination of the future. In the 80s and 90s, events such as the fall of the Berlin Wall, the dissolution of the USSR, the defeat of the miners' strike in Britain, the rise of Thatcherism, and so on, cemented a devastating idea into the global cultural consciousness: capitalist realism, encapsulated perfectly in the Jameson quote, "It's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism, that there is no alternative, that maybe we can make things a little fairer, maybe we can ask for greater welfare, but a total turn away from global capitalism and its political and economic forms is realistically impossible." Fisher likens this realism to the deflationary perspective of a depressive who believes that any positive state, any hope, is a dangerous illusion. As such, any and all imagination for something new and different are not just quickly extinguished, but they never even occur, as we are socialized into such a culture. How long can a culture persist without the new? What happens if the young are no longer capable of producing surprises? Are the questions Fisher poses. This can be seen in how a lot of the so-called new trends in pop culture are all virtually rehashed 20th century trends and ideas. Quote, Jameson famously claimed that postmodernism is the cultural logic of late capitalism. He argued that the failure of the future was constitutive of a postmodern cultural scene which, as he correctly prophesied, would become dominated by pastiche and revivalism. Only a few years ago, we saw a return of 80s disco in pop stars like The Weeknd and Dua Lipa with their synths and bassy tracks. Filmmakers reverting back to 16mm films or having the boxed aspect ratio or digitally adding VHS or analog filters, hey, I do that, are another example of this. Even things like, and I am still wrapping my head around the fact that I'm going to mention this alongside one of these videos, the skibbity toilet shorts and memes are very evocative of old Gary's Mod shitposts and skits around 10 years ago. People really like to pretend that this is some type of new low IQ entertainment thing and Gen Z is cooked, but not really, it's still Gmod. 2010 kids grew up watching comparable TF2 and GTA slop. Trust me, I know, I am one of them. If you've kept track of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you know how a major criticism being thrown against them is how Marvel has been essentially preying on its audience's nostalgia, bringing back old characters for the sake of appealing to us so that we'll drop on our little knees and surrender our wallets and
pray to the all-powerful Lovecraftian god behind Disney Corporation.
Trust me, I know. I'm one of them. And this time, I am not proud at all. The retrofuturism we see in genres like cyberpunk and vaporwave and, well, most sci-fi we see nowadays are all examples of how even the old visions of the future are returning, how we have begun to feel nostalgia for even yesterday's tomorrows because we are no longer able to imagine a fresh new tomorrow for ourselves. Fisher correctly suggests that nostalgia strips down all culture, context, emotion, and feeling to mere aesthetic longing. This can be seen again with the MCU in how they renamed their upcoming Avengers movie and brought back fan favorite actor of billionaire dickhead Robert Downey Jr. to play Doctor Doom for the sole reason of creating fan excitement over the return of an actor who played that one guy who people loved because he died saying the same thing he said a few years ago in a different movie, also a Marvel movie named after that guy. Again, even I Am Iron Man being a self-reference. Also, I just realized this is also what Frost and Lynch did with The Return, bringing back Kyle MacLachlan to play Dale Cooper, but like they did it good. I like some of the Marvel films. I really like the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy. I'll probably make a video on it someday. A really long one, maybe. I don't know. Marvel's not all bad, I swear. But like it mostly is though. In T.S. Eliot's essay, Tradition and the Individual Talent, he described the reciprocal relationship between the canonical and the new. The new defines itself in response to what is already established. At the same time, the established has to reconfigure itself in response to the new. Eliot's claim was that the exhaustion of the future does not even leave us with the past. Tradition counts for nothing when it is no longer contested and modified. A culture that is merely preserved is no culture at all. Hence, nostalgia is now a global cultural symptom that stems from the social malaise that is capitalist realism. And as we saw with Lacan and Freud, this longing for return is not only a sign that things are wrong, but is itself a destructive force. Quote, not only is Mark Jefferson one of the best photographers in the world, he's also my teacher. and one of the reasons I wanted to come to Blackwell. How often do you get to be mentored by one of your inspirations? I've always loved his deco and goth style, and he's so versatile with all of his incredible print and advertising work. Of course, as it turns out, Mark Jefferson, Max's photography teacher's reputation and credibility is exactly what enables him to carry out the abductions and murders. That is to say, the trust in the past, specifically in the infallibility of what has been, is the real weapon Jefferson uses. Like Twin Peaks, Life is Strange, with its revelation about the true evil was lurking within all along, argues that it's rarely outsiders, hobos, or mentally ill people, the alien or the new, who end up being the true perpetrators of evil. Instead, it is what has always been there, what has cemented itself in our past as to keep power over us in the present and consume our future. However, the reason why in the introduction section I called Life is Strange a Lynchian horror isn't the reveal that Mark Jefferson is the bad guy. The ending of Life is Strange has the player make one final big decision. We've made decisions all throughout the journey, and indeed the best way to finish it all is this all-important final choice. Save Arcadia Bay, the quiet seaside town full of people you've talked to, helped, and built connections with, from a raging storm resulting from you using your powers, but at the same time, let Chloe die in the floor of the college bathroom all those days ago, as you go back to the moment you got your powers and never use it again. Or save Chloe, your childhood best friend and the single person you've gone through hell and back to save, almost literally, while leaving the town to the rage of the storm. There isn't a canonical ending to this. What you choose is what happens. From what I saw on the internet, a surprising amount of people chose the bittersweet option, that is, to save Chloe and let the town get wrecked by the storm. A lot of people really believed in the connection they formed with her character and chose to save her over an entire town. What did I choose? Well, I also chose to save Chloe, and it has nothing to do with the fact that I like punk girls who will yell at me. The reason is that this ending is perhaps the Twin Peaks The Return equivalent of Life is Strange. This ending only retains the sweet part of bittersweet if we don't think about the future. Realistically, the kind of fucked up Chloe has been for the past 7 years, things won't work out for them. Not only so, the both of them will now have to deal with the fact that they chose to save this one person's life over the hundreds of families that lived in Arcadia Bay, their childhood home. In other words, this ending is not a bittersweet one as much as it is just a bitter one. Max's seemingly unconditional love for Chloe seems to be, when looked at through the nostalgia analysis lens, immature and ultimately destructive. The reason why Chloe is posed as a character we should be sympathetic to is because this is the true horror of nostalgia. Nostalgia is a fantasy, a sort of reality-altering glosses that leads people to ignore the glaringly obvious problems present in a place, a person, or a time. You've probably heard some old people or conservative folks say something along the lines of, "Back in my day, things weren't as bad as they are now." Well, that's nostalgia talking, and here, the same nostalgia has led Max to ignore the root problems in Chloe and in her society, and has led her to basically sacrificing the entire town to save this one person who, indeed, is still grieving, still dysfunctional, and still toxic. All this can be neatly embodied in the concept of the golden hour, brought up when Max and Chloe watch the majestic sunset together by the seashore. Nostalgia is indeed like the golden hour. It is beautiful and comforting. It is warm and pleasant, but it only brings with it the cold and the dark. That brings us, or one could even say returns us, to the return. It opens with the very same Twin Peaks opening track by God himself, Angelo Badalamenti, that welcomed us all throughout the first 2 seasons. The opening, although no longer the exact same, pans over and dissolves into a chain of recognizable and, taking into account the 25 years gap, nostalgic Twin Peaks signifiers, from Laura's iconic prom queen portrait, the waterfall, the black and white zigzag pattern of the red room, and so on. They even kept the old ugly font. But although the packaging promises a proper return to the beloved town and characters and suggests service for the nostalgia-hungry audience's wishes of seeing their favorite Twin Peaks back in action, the show itself is slow to bring us back in town, instead opting to start with a gory and confusing paranormal incident and following an older, slowly giving into senile decay Gordon Cole and a balding Agent Rosenfield investigating a weird reality-bending Blue Rose case. Once we do enter the town, the warmth and welcomeness we might have expected are not what we are met with. It's not exactly that things have changed. They have, but not quite by much. The sheriff station still exists, although with Harry being replaced by his brother Frank due to some health issue. That is, it's still headed by a Truman. Lucy and Andy are still around and have matured into their age. They even had a cute little Michael Cera together. The Double R Diner is not only still around, but has in fact grown to be a restaurant chain that has escaped the confines of the town. James is still around, still a biker, and still cool. Ben and Jerry Horn are still around, with Ben having matured and seemingly having accepted his lot and leaving his ambitions behind, and Jerry, well, he seems to be doing things. Local bad boy Bobby has grown into the shoes and belt of a police officer and has a daughter with Shelley. Ed and Norma are still not together, but even more surprisingly, they seem to still want to do so. Dr. Jacoby's become some kind of internet ideologue who's engaged in
shovel your way out of the shit!
Aye aye, comrade, and best girl Audrey's still around. See, it's not as simple as saying that this new Twin Peaks is no longer the old one and that it's colder and darker. It's stayed about as much as a town can hope to stay in the span of 25 years, especially that 25 years being elapsed in the time period from the 90s to the 2010s. What Lynch and Frost give us with The Return isn't a new alien Twin Peaks, but just the old one, which has overstayed its welcome. Of course, new things have come around. We see many new and young faces. We see that the sheriff station has a larger staff now, but the newness feels less new than a repetition of the old. The new bad boy in town, Audrey's grandson, basically replaces Bob's evil presence throughout the old Twin Peaks. The young folk in town are still pretty much preoccupied with the same problems, that of mental health, drugs, money, and so on, that the 90s youth were in the original. All in all, this is Twin Peaks, and that's what makes it disturbing. Audrey's dance in the Roadhouse, obviously meant to reference the dance she did back in the first season at the diner, starts off as genuinely warm and beautiful, before it slowly reveals itself to be almost hideous, as Audrey herself expresses extreme discomfort and fear. The uncanny that now becomes apparent isn't the coldness of change or the alien. It's the coldness of the return itself. A coldness of a return to a place we should have left long, long ago. And the character most clearly embodying this is, of course, Dale Cooper. Cooper, at the end of the original series, ventured forth into the Black Lodge, and in his absence, the Black Lodge sent forth a doppelganger. This doppelganger, often called Evil Cooper or Smooth Criminal, I'm sorry, no one calls him that, has wandered the world doing all sorts of terrible things, from SA to murder. Our old Cooper tries to exit the lodge. However, the Black Lodge, being the Black Lodge, replaces another Cooper lookalike named Dougie Jones in the real world with our old Coop. However, on his way back, Old Cooper is basically rendered memoryless and intellectless, as he is reduced to someone who repeats the same words he hears and imitates whatever he sees. The two of them, Dougie and Evil Cooper, make up most of The Return's Dale Cooper. One stripped of the old charm and morality that made Cooper lovable, and the other stripped of the wit and, well, pretty much everything else other than the charming aspect. For most of The Return, we are made to watch a man who looks like our beloved caffeine addict carry out the most terrifying and immoral acts that Cooper would never do, and another being reduced essentially to a donkey being led on by a carrot on a stick. As such, the audience reaction to this new split Cooper identity was unsurprisingly mixed. Many enjoyed Dougie and found Evil Coop terrifying and yet interesting, while others just wanted good old Cooper back. Indeed, I must confess, I too at points just wanted to see my only favorite FBI character back in action again. I genuinely yearned for a return. I wanted the old Coop to swoop in and explain everything to Janie E, drive all the way back to good old Twin Peaks, sit down at the Double R Diner, and drink some, damn fine cup of coffee. And for a second, it seemed that Lynch and Frost were gonna reward us for going through some of the most unflinchingly surreal and breathtaking filmmaking, covering some of the most deepest and darkest themes in television history. And so, there he was. And his return starts off just as asked for. He returns, quickly grasps the situation, does not waste time fumbling around, says the words,
"I am the FBI."
That gets all the fans all riled up and flies off to good old Twin Peaks. But remember, beautiful roses planted in front of perfectly white picket fences reveal the inherent and overwhelming darkness just upon a closer look. Cooper's return, just like Twin Peaks' return to television, is evocative of the same perils of nostalgia. Just like the town itself, which has grown in uncanny coldness due to it being lost in nostalgia, how its inhabitants too, their problems still remaining even after 25 years, unable to move on or imagine a future from the events following the death of Laura Palmer, Cooper is a man stuck in the past, forever trying to save a girl who was killed by the very same forces which now imprison him. He too hasn't grown in the past 25 years. A scene that takes place in the first half of The Return, where Bobby enters the conference room where Best Boy Deputy Hawk is investigating some of the old pieces of evidence from the Laura Palmer case and sees Laura's old prom queen portrait and just breaks down into tears. Remember, Bobby, 25 years ago, almost correctly pointed out how we all killed Laura Palmer. Indeed, it was Twin Peaks which killed Laura Palmer. And now it holds us all captive, even Bobby. This portrait has been a symbol of Twin Peaks nostalgia. We see it all throughout the first two seasons, we see it in the intro to The Return, and we see it in The Return. Pictures are, of course, artifacts that trap time and space into becoming static. It is no coincidence that pictures are one of the most common and effective invokers of nostalgia. They are, in a sense, made for each other. The moment in history we were first able to capture the spatial dimensions accurately and store it forever in a contained way, humanity sealed the fact of nostalgia forever pervading our lives. That's not to say that nostalgia didn't exist before photography was invented. In the penultimate episode, however, we see Laura's mother smash this larger-than-life portrait into pieces using a vodka bottle. Cooper returns to the events of Fire Walk With Me to save Laura, to bring her back home. This basically leads to the erasure of the dark Twin Peaks we know, as of course the original show was hinged intensely to the events and relations surrounding her murder. However, Lynch and Frost aren't fan service salesmen. They're not Marvel. The last episode finds our tired and old FBI agent tracking down Laura, now going by the name Carrie. He brings her back to Twin Peaks to bring her back home to her mother. But something's off. This is not Twin Peaks. The people in the Palmer's house are not the Palmers. It's someone else. They don't even know the Palmers. The Twin Peaks we once knew was a perverse encapsulation of nostalgia. The yearning to go back to a time and a place where things are fine. But as we learn, such a place never existed. Nothing was ever fine. Nostalgia needs no reason. Nostalgia consumes all. It consumes the past. It consumes the present. And most dangerously, it has consumed the future.
What year is this?
Thank you for watching this video. A special thank you to Key and Abs for being my Patreon members. Thank you very much for your support. If you like the videos that I make and would like to support me, check out my Patreon, link down in the description down below. There are perks and stuff for when you join my Patreon, so yeah. Anyway, subscribe and comment and do all that stuff. Like the video. That's probably a good idea. And yeah, that's it. Thank you. Bye bye.